Hello, everyone. My name is Genevieve Devereaux, and I'm 32 years old. For most of my life, I was the quiet variable in a very loud equation, the forgotten footnote in my family's gilded story. But when they wrote me out of the narrative for good, staging my death to hide their crimes, they never imagined that a ghost could learn to haunt them so completely. They left me for dead on the side of a forgotten road, but what they really did was set me free. Before I dive into how I dismantled my family's billion-dollar empire from beyond the grave, I want to connect with all of you out there. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's comforting to know that stories can reach across the world and find people who understand. And if you've ever felt underestimated or cast aside by the people who are supposed to love you most, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe to join our community of survivors and storytellers. This is a journey of vindication, and I'm so grateful to have you here to witness it. My story begins not with a bang, but with a whisper of disappointment that followed me through childhood. I grew up in the shadow of the Devereaux name, a name that was less a part of my identity and more like a monolithic skyscraper I was forced to live inside. Our home was a sprawling stone manor in Greenwich, Connecticut, a place with more rooms than warmth, where the floors were polished to a mirror shine and the silence was often louder than any conversation. My father, Alastair Devereaux, was the patriarch, a man carved from granite and ambition. He was the founder and CEO of Devereaux Capital, an investment firm that was his true firstborn. He moved through our home like a visiting dignitary, his presence demanding reverence and his approval being the currency we all craved. My mother, Eleanor, was his perfect counterpart. She was elegant, socially flawless, and utterly dedicated to maintaining the family's pristine public image. Her love was conditional, a prize awarded for adherence to the Devereaux brand of perfection. And then there was my brother, Julian. Julian was the sun around which our family orbited. He was 2 years older, effortlessly charming, and destined to inherit the throne. He had our father's charisma and our mother's social grace. He was the golden child, the crown prince, and every one of his achievements, no matter how small, was celebrated with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for a national holiday. His first word, his first steps, his acceptance into Yale, each was a milestone for the Devereaux dynasty. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the observer. While Julian was out charming investors at charity galas by the age of 16, I was tucked away in the library, finding solace in the predictable logic of numbers. I was good at math, a skill my father found useful, but not particularly impressive. Genevieve, he would say with a dismissive pat on my head, our little abacus. Every empire needs its bean counters, I suppose. He never saw me. He saw a function, a utility. I remember one Christmas dinner vividly. I was 17 and had just won a prestigious national mathematics competition, a fact I was quietly proud of. I'd worked for months, solving complex proofs that my own teachers had struggled with. My mother had insisted I not mention it at the dinner table with guests over. "It's a bit dry, darling," she'd whispered, adjusting the collar of my dress. "Let's stick to more engaging topics." Later that evening, Julian, who was home from his first semester at Yale, regaled the table with a story about a prank he'd pulled in his dorm. It was a mildly amusing anecdote, but my father roared with laughter, his eyes gleaming with pride. He clapped Julian on the back and declared to the assembled guests, This one has vision. He understands people. That's what builds empires, not theorems." I felt myself shrink in my chair, the weight of his words pressing down on me. My victory felt small and foolish, a pile of dust next to Julian's shining charisma. I looked to my mother for some sign of support, a small smile, a nod of encouragement. But she was looking at Julian, her face alight with the same adoration as our father's. In that moment, I wasn't their daughter. I was just a spectator to their love for him. This dynamic only intensified as we grew older. I went to a state university, a choice my parents deemed practical but uninspired. I graduated summa cum laude, with a degree in forensic accounting. It was a field that fascinated me, the art of finding truth hidden in a sea of numbers. Against my better judgment and my own burgeoning desire for independence, I accepted a position at Devereaux Capital. A part of me, the part that still desperately craved my father's approval, believed that if I could prove my worth within his world, on his terms, he would finally see me. I was assigned to a small, windowless office in the back of the accounting department. I was Genevieve Devereaux, but within the walls of that company, I was just another employee and a low-ranking one at that. Julian, who had a degree in art history, was given a vice president title and a corner office with a panoramic view of the city. He was being groomed for the top job, while I was tasked with reconciling expense reports and cross-referencing invoices. I tried to connect with my family to bridge the ever-widening chasm between us. I would invite my mother to lunch, hoping for a simple, human conversation. She would always accept, but the conversation would inevitably drift to Julian's latest social conquest or a critique of my wardrobe. "Genevieve, darling," she'd say, dabbing her lips with a napkin, "you have such a brilliant mind. It's a shame you don't put a little more effort into your appearance." No one respects a woman who doesn't respect herself enough to look the part. The implication was clear. I was a disappointment, a project she had no interest in completing. My attempts with my father were even more futile. I tried to discuss my work, to show him the efficiencies I'd found, the small-scale internal fraud I'd uncovered and stopped. He'd listen with an air of detached impatience before cutting me off. Good. That's what you're paid for. Now I have a meeting with the board. Julian is presenting his new marketing strategy. The boy's a natural. My contributions were a task completed. Julian's were a legacy in the making. I worked hard, harder than anyone. I kept my head down and poured myself into the work, finding a strange comfort in the black and white certainty of the ledgers. The numbers didn't lie. They didn't have favorites. They simply were what they were. For years, I told myself this was enough. I had a stable job, a life that was, on the surface, comfortable. But a deep, quiet ache had settled into my bones. It was the ache of being invisible, of screaming in a soundproof room. I was a ghost in my own family, a silent witness to my own erasure. And I had no idea. The discovery began, as most catastrophes do, with something small. A single, insignificant line item in a quarterly report that just felt wrong. It was a wire transfer for $250,000 from a subsidiary holding company to an entity I'd never heard of, Nightingale Holdings, LLC. The description was vague. Consulting fees. It was late on a Tuesday night. The office was empty, the silence broken only by the hum of the servers and the distant siren of a city that never slept. I should have gone home. I should have flagged it for my department head and forgotten about it. But my father's dismissive words from that afternoon still echoed in my ears. I tried to show him a report on a new risk assessment model I'd developed, and he'd waved it away without a glance. "Genevieve, I have bigger fish to fry. Leave the operational minutiae to the managers." Something inside me, a stubborn little spark of defiance, decided to fry this fish myself. I pulled up the file on Nightingale Holdings. It was a shell corporation registered in Delaware, with no public profile, no website, and no listed officers. Its address was a P.O. box. This was a common enough tactic for privacy, but for a $250,000 consulting fee, it was sloppy. I started digging. Using the access privileges I had, privileges my father assumed I'd only ever use for mundane tasks, I began to trace the payment. The money hadn't stayed with Nightingale. It had been funneled through 2 more offshore accounts, one in the Cayman Islands and another in Switzerland, before landing in a personal account. An account belonging to a man named Marcus Thorne, the chairman of the state's pension fund advisory board. A man who had, just last month, signed off on a massive investment of public pension funds into a new Devereaux Capital high-risk venture fund. It wasn't a consulting fee. It was a bribe. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just unethical, it was brutally illegal. The scale of it was staggering. This couldn't be the only instance. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the quiet accountant, reconciling reports and nodding politely in meetings. But by night, I descended into a digital rabbit hole, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of dread. I worked from my home computer, using encrypted connections to access the Devereaux servers remotely, covering my tracks with a caution that bordered on paranoia. Each night, the picture grew darker and more sprawling. It wasn't just bribes. My father had constructed an elaborate house of cards. He was using a network of shell corporations to inflate the value of his company's assets, creating a false image of spectacular growth. He would then use this inflated valuation to attract new investors, pension funds, university endowments, and thousands of small-time individual investors who believed they were putting their life savings into a rock-solid institution. The fraud was a masterpiece of deception. The new venture fund that Marcus Thorne had approved? It was a ghost. It existed only on paper. The money poured into it was being siphoned off to cover losses in other failing Devereaux investments and, more disgustingly, to fund my family's obscenely lavish lifestyle. The chateau in France, my mother's collection of diamonds, Julian's fleet of sports cars, it was all being paid for with the stolen futures of teachers, firefighters, and ordinary people who had trusted them. I found internal memos, encrypted emails between my father and my brother. Julian wasn't just the charming face of the company, he was an active participant. He was the one managing the network of offshore accounts, the one whose signature appeared on the wire transfers to shell companies with names like Elysian Fields and Oracle Investments, cruel, poetic jokes. The deeper I went, the more the weight of it pressed down on me. This wasn't just a corporate crime. It was a betrayal on a scale I could barely comprehend. The entire Devereaux legacy, the name I had carried with a mixture of shame and longing my whole life, was built on a foundation of lies and theft. For days, I was paralyzed by what I knew. What could I do? Go to the authorities? My father was one of the most powerful men in the country. He had judges and politicians in his pocket. They would crush me. The Devereaux legal team would paint me as a disgruntled, mentally unstable daughter seeking revenge. They would destroy my life, my career, my reputation. But how could I live with myself if I did nothing? The faces of the people whose lives were being dismantled by my family's greed haunted my sleep. Finally, clinging to a fragile, naive hope that my father might not have understood the full extent of it, that Julian might have misled him, I decided to confront him. It was a foolish, desperate gamble, the last gasp of the daughter who still wanted to believe her father was a good man. I requested a meeting with him, a formality that felt absurd. I found him in his vast, mahogany-paneled office, staring out at the city skyline like a king surveying his domain. I closed the door behind me, my heart hammering against my ribs. I presented the evidence calmly, methodically, laying out printouts of the wire transfers and the corporate structures on his pristine desk. I didn't accuse. I questioned. "Father," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "I found some irregularities in the accounts for the new venture fund. It looks like money is being moved in a way that doesn't make sense. It seems to connect to Marcus Thorne." I watched his face, searching for any sign of shock or confusion. There was none. He looked at the papers, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at me, and a slow, cold smile spread across his lips. It wasn't a smile of warmth or pride. It was a smile of appraisal, like a butcher looking at a side of beef. "Genevieve," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "I have underestimated you. Your diligence is truly remarkable." He stood up and walked around the desk, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a comforting gesture. It was a proprietary one. "You see things in black and white. It's your gift and your limitation. The world of high finance is a complex ecosystem. Sometimes for the forest to thrive, you have to prune a few branches. You have to nurture relationships. What you see as irregularities, I see as the necessary cost of doing business on a global scale." He was gaslighting me, wrapping a crime in the language of corporate strategy. "You've done excellent work bringing this to my attention," he continued, his tone shifting to one of paternal authority. "It shows your loyalty. Now, I need you to demonstrate that loyalty by forgetting what you've seen. Destroy these papers. This is a family matter, a matter for myself and Julian to handle. You've done your part. Now, Let the men with vision take it from here. He squeezed my shoulder, a final, chilling act of dismissal. I looked into my father's eyes and saw not a man who had been misled, but the architect of the entire monstrous scheme. And in that same moment, I saw the reflection of my own terrifying naivety. I wasn't his daughter. I was a loose end. I left his office in a daze, the cold dread solidifying in my stomach. His words, "A matter for myself and Julian to handle," echoed in my mind. He hadn't just admitted to it. He had implicated my brother. The two people who should have been my protectors were partners in a crime of devastating proportions. The realization that I was in danger was not a sudden epiphany, but a slow, creeping cold that started in my fingertips and spread through my entire body. My father hadn't just been dismissive. He had been sizing me up. He was testing my compliance, and he must have seen in my eyes that I wouldn't just let it go. I was the one flaw in his perfect system, the one person with the knowledge and the access to bring it all crashing down. For the next 2 days, I was a bundle of nerves. I tried to act normal, but the office felt like a prison. Every polite smile from a colleague felt like a spy's assessment. Every phone call made me jump. I knew I had to get the evidence I'd collected to a safe place, somewhere outside the Devereaux sphere of influence. I had copied everything onto a small, encrypted hard drive, a tiny metal rectangle that held the power to ruin my family and, I feared, to end my life. I decided I would drive to a friend's house in a neighboring state that weekend, a friend from college who had no connection to my family, and figure out my next move from there. I needed to be somewhere safe, somewhere I could think. The call came on Friday afternoon. It was Julian. His voice was unusually warm, almost cloying. "Jen, hey. Dad told me you were working pretty hard on that venture fund audit. Said you were a real superstar." I felt a jolt of fear. "He wants to thank you properly," Julian continued. "We're having a small family dinner tonight up at the lake house. Just us. Mom's making your favorite cocoa vin. A real celebration of our brilliant baby sister." The invitation was so out of character, so transparently false, that my blood ran cold. A family dinner. Just us. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. I have plans tonight, Julian," I stammered, my mind racing for a plausible excuse. "Oh, come on, Jen," he wheedled, the charm in his voice curdling into something sharp. "Don't be like that. This is important. Dad insists. I'll even drive you up myself after work. We can take the scenic route." The scenic route. The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken menace. The road to our lake house was a winding, isolated stretch of asphalt that snaked through a dense state forest, with steep ravines on one side. "I'll drive myself," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have to run an errand first. I'll meet you there." I needed to control my own exit. If I went with him, I knew I wouldn't be coming back. He hesitated for a moment, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "All right, fine. Don't be late. Dad's really looking forward to this." He hung up. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my phone. This was it. They were closing the net. I packed a small bag, grabbed the encrypted hard drive, and left the office, telling my secretary I was feeling ill. I didn't go home. I got in my car and just started driving, with no destination in mind other than away. As dusk began to settle, tinting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, I found myself on that very same scenic route Julian had mentioned. It was a foolish, subconscious choice, a road I had driven 1,000 times, a path of familiarity in a world that had suddenly become terrifyingly alien. The forest pressed in on both sides, the tall trees creating a canopy that swallowed the last of the light. I was 20 miles from the nearest town. My phone had lost its signal 10 minutes ago. I glanced in my rearview mirror. A pair of headlights appeared, approaching fast. It was a large, black SUV, the kind my father's security detail used. It had no license plate on the front. My heart leaped into my throat. I pressed my foot on the accelerator, my small sedan straining to pull away. But the SUV was a predator, powerful and relentless. It closed the distance in seconds, its engine a low, guttural roar. It tailgated me, its brights blinding me in the rearview mirror. I swerved, my tires screeching on the asphalt. Then came the first impact. The SUV slammed into my rear bumper, a violent jolt that sent my head snapping back. A second, harder impact followed, and my car spun out of control. The world became a dizzying, terrifying kaleidoscope of green and black as I skidded towards the edge of the road. I screamed as the car broke through the flimsy guardrail, plunging into the darkness of the ravine. The descent was a chaotic symphony of destruction. The sound of groaning, twisting metal, the explosive shatter of glass, the violent thud of the car hitting trees on its way down. It finally came to rest at the bottom of the ravine, wrapped around a thick oak tree, the engine hissing like a dying animal. Pain was a white-hot fire consuming my body. My leg was trapped, twisted at an unnatural angle. I could taste blood in my mouth. Through the shattered windshield, I saw a figure descending the steep incline of the ravine, moving with a confident stride. As the figure grew closer, my vision swam, but I could make out the expensive shoes, the tailored trousers. It was my brother,
Julian.
He knelt beside the wreckage, peering in at me through the broken driver's side window. There was no panic on his face, no concern. Just a cold, detached assessment. He thought I was unconscious or already dead. "Sorry, sis," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hissing of the engine. "Dad's orders. You just couldn't leave it alone." He reached in, his fingers brushing past my face to retrieve my purse from the passenger seat. He was looking for the hard drive. He didn't find it. I had it tucked into the inner pocket of my jacket. Satisfied that my purse was empty, he stood up. He pulled out his phone, and I heard the faint click of a photo being taken. Evidence for my father that the job was done. Then he turned and walked away, climbing back up the ravine without a second glance. As he disappeared over the edge, the last of my strength gave out, and the world dissolved into blackness. I was alone, left for dead by my own family in the cold, dark woods. The line between life and death is not a line at all, but a murky, gray fog. I drifted in that fog for what felt like an eternity, suspended in a realm of pain and half-formed memories. I was dimly aware of sounds, the distant cry of a nocturnal bird, the rustling of leaves, and then, a sound that didn't belong, the crunch of footsteps on gravel. A light sliced through the darkness, moving over the mangled chassis of my car. A voice, low and rough, cut through the haze. "Hello? Is anyone in there?" I tried to answer, but only a faint, gurgling sound escaped my lips. The car door was wrenched open with a groan of protesting metal. A man's face appeared, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. He was bearded, with sharp, intelligent eyes that held a flicker of something I couldn't place. Shock, maybe, or a grim sort of recognition. He worked quickly and efficiently, using a crowbar to pry the crushed dashboard off my leg. The pain was excruciating, a blinding white light that threatened to pull me under again. "Hang on," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the chaos. "I'm getting you out." He managed to free me, lifting me from the wreckage with a surprising gentleness. As he carried me up the steep embankment, my head lolled against his shoulder, and my eyes fluttered open just long enough to see his face more clearly. There was a scar that ran through his left eyebrow, a faint white line against his tan skin. Then, mercifully, the fog rolled in again, and I knew no more. I awoke to the smell of antiseptic and wood smoke. I was lying on a simple bed in a small, rustic cabin. Sunlight streamed through a clean window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. My leg was splinted and bandaged, my ribs were tightly wrapped, and a dozen smaller cuts and bruises had been cleaned and dressed. My entire body was a symphony of aches. The man from the crash sat in a chair by the fire, sharpening a knife with a whetstone. He looked up when he heard me stir. "Welcome back to the land of the living," he said, his voice devoid of any particular emotion. "Who are you?" I rasped, my throat raw. He set the knife down. "The name's Liam. And you're Genevieve Devereaux." He said my name not as a question, but as a statement of fact. A cold knot of fear tightened in my gut. He saw the look on my face. "Don't worry," he said, with a humorless smile. "If I wanted to hurt you, I would have left you in the car. I found your wallet when I was patching you up." Over the next few days, as my body slowly began to knit itself back together, the story came out in pieces. Liam was a recluse, living off the grid in this small cabin he had built himself. He was a former soldier, trained as a medic, which explained his ability to patch me up without a hospital. And, as we talked, a more stunning truth emerged. "Liam," I asked, my mind foggy with pain medication he'd sourced from an old first aid kit. "Your last name isn't O'Connell, is it?" He stopped stirring the soup he was making and looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "How do you know that?" I remembered the name from a file I had seen years ago, a file from before my time at the company, but one that was legendary in the archives. Liam O'Connell. He was the founder and CEO of Innovatech, a brilliant, disruptive tech company that had been on the verge of revolutionizing data security. Devereaux Capital had initiated a hostile takeover. They hadn't just bought his company. They had gutted it, sold off its patents for pennies on the dollar, and bankrupted him in the process. But it was worse than that. My father had also launched a vicious smear campaign, accusing Liam of fraud and mismanagement, destroying his reputation so completely that he could never work in the tech world again. He had lost everything, his company, his fortune, his name, all because my father saw him as a threat. He listened, his expression grim, as I told him my own story. I told him about the fraud I'd uncovered, the confrontation with my father, and the cold, calculated way my own brother had left me to die. When I finished, the cabin was silent, save for the crackling of the fire. Liam stared into the flames, his jaw tight. "Alistair Devereaux," he said, the name like a curse on his lips. "He doesn't just crush his enemies. He salts the earth where they stood. And he'd do it to his own daughter." He looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw not a stranger, but an ally. We were two different people from two different worlds, brought together by the same destructive force. We were survivors of the same man. A bond, forged in the crucible of our shared betrayal, began to form between us. As the weeks passed, my physical wounds began to heal, but my emotional ones festered. The grief was a tidal wave, pulling me under. My family hadn't just tried to kill me. They had erased me. I saw on an old newspaper Liam had in the cabin that my funeral had already been held. The official story was that I, despondent and intoxicated, had tragically driven off the road. They'd painted me as a victim of my own weakness, a convenient narrative that covered their tracks and garnered them a sick sort of public sympathy. The grief slowly, painstakingly, began to curdle into something else. It became a cold, hard, diamond-like substance in the center of my chest. Rage. "They can't get away with this," I said to Liam one evening, my voice shaking with an intensity that surprised me. "They can't." Liam, who had been watching me, nursing his own quiet anger for a decade, nodded slowly. "No," he said. "They can't." That night, a plan began to take shape. It was audacious, reckless, and probably insane. We couldn't go to the police. The Devereaux machine would chew us up and spit us out. My evidence was on a hard drive, but without my testimony, and with my faked death, it was useless. We had to fight them on our own terms. We had to become ghosts. "Your father thinks you're dead," Liam said, his eyes gleaming with a strategic fire I hadn't seen before. "A dead woman can't testify, but a ghost can haunt." He still had skills, he explained. His old life as a tech CEO wasn't completely gone. He had hidden servers, backdoors into financial systems he had helped design years ago, a network of contacts who owed him favors and hated the established powers. He had the technical arsenal. I had the target information. I knew every dirty secret, every hidden account, every psychological weakness of the Devereaux family. I was the key, and he was the weapon. Liam's cabin became our war room. He set up a formidable command center, powered by a generator and connected to the internet via a series of untraceable satellite links. His old skills came rushing back, his fingers flying across keyboards with a speed and confidence that was mesmerizing. He taught me the basics of cybersecurity, of encryption, of how to move through the digital world without leaving a trace. I, in turn, drew him a map of the Devereaux Empire's soul. I detailed the financial architecture, but I also detailed the human architecture. I told him about my mother's obsession with social standing, my father's crippling narcissism, and Julian's desperate need for our father's approval, coupled with his deep-seated insecurity. We weren't just going to hit their bank accounts, we were going to hit their minds. Our objective was not simply to expose them, but to systematically dismantle their world from the inside out, to make them tear each other apart before we delivered the final blow. Our first strike was a test, a gentle push to see how the system would react. Devereaux Capital was scheduled to pay out its quarterly dividends to its top-tier investors. It was a massive sum, a display of the company's supposed financial health. The night before the payout, Liam and I sat side by side at the glowing monitors. "Ready?" he asked. I took a deep breath and nodded. With a few keystrokes, Liam exploited a vulnerability in the payment processing software, a flaw he himself had identified years ago. He didn't steal the money. He rerouted it. The entire 8-figure dividend payment was anonymously and irrevocably transferred to a newly created trust for the victims of investment fraud. The next morning, the chaos was beautiful to watch. The phones at Devereaux Capital lit up with furious calls from their most powerful investors. The stock ticker took a nosedive. My father had to go on financial news channels, his face a mask of strained composure, blaming the incident on a highly sophisticated and malicious cyber attack and promising a full investigation. He was forced to publicly guarantee he would cover the lost dividends from his personal funds, a move that cost him dearly in both cash and credibility. In our cabin, Liam and I watched the broadcast, and for the first time since the crash, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. It was power. Our second attack was more personal, designed to splinter the family unit. Julian prided himself on his image as a shrewd, disciplined young executive. It was a lie. I knew he had a secret gambling problem and a taste for extravagances that, even by Devereaux standards, were extreme. I had tracked his spending for years. Using a secure email account, we anonymously leaked his American Express black card statements and records of his wire transfers to bookies in Macau to a notorious online gossip columnist. The story went viral. The golden boy of Wall Street was exposed as a reckless gambler with a penchant for $100,000 watches and private jets to fly his models of the week to St. Bart's. The leak created a firestorm. We watched through a hacked webcam in Alistair's office as he screamed at Julian, his face purple with rage. He wasn't angry about the immorality of it. He was furious about the public relations nightmare. "You idiot! You reckless child! You've made us look like fools," he bellowed. The trust between the king and his heir was beginning to crack. We sowed psychological terror. Liam, a master of social engineering, cloned Eleanor's jeweler's phone number. He called her, pretending to be confirming the delivery details for an extravagant diamond necklace. Eleanor, assuming it was a surprise from Alistair, played along coyly. Liam then sent her a confirmation email with a picture of the necklace, a stunning, multi-million-dollar piece. A week later, when no necklace had arrived, Eleanor confronted Alistair during a dinner party. Her quiet, seething accusations of him buying jewels for a mistress in front of their powerful friends caused a scene of epic proportions. The argument continued long after the guests had made their hasty departures. We were turning their own vanity and paranoia into weapons against them. We even used my ghost to our advantage. I wrote an anonymous letter to the board of directors, written in a style they would recognize as mine, meticulous, data-driven, and dry. The letter didn't claim I was alive. It claimed to be from a concerned colleague of the late Genevieve Devereaux, stating that before her tragic accident, she had expressed grave concerns about financial mismanagement within the new venture fund and had been collecting a file. The letter hinted that this file might still exist. It was a bluff, but it worked perfectly. It created a schism on the board between those loyal to Alistair and those who were now terrified of a potential SEC investigation. The seeds of doubt we had planted were beginning to sprout, their thorny vines wrapping around the foundations of the Devereaux empire, pulling it apart stone by stone. Liam and I worked in the shadows, two ghosts bound by a shared past, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to step into the light and watch it all burn down. The perfect moment arrived cloaked in hypocrisy. The Devereaux family, reeling from the internal chaos and public scrutiny we had orchestrated, announced their annual philanthropic gala. This year, it was grander than ever, a desperate, glittering attempt to launder their tarnished reputation. The theme was transparency and trust, a joke so audacious it was almost sublime. They were launching the Eleanor Devereaux Foundation for Ethical Enterprise, and the gala was to be its inaugural event. It was the pinnacle of their arrogance, a monument to their lies built on a bedrock of stolen money. It was also the perfect stage for our final act. For weeks, we planned every detail with the precision of a military operation. Liam worked tirelessly, building a digital Trojan horse, a masterpiece of code that would give us complete control over the gala's entire audiovisual system. My role was to prepare the payload, the irrefutable proof. I organized the encrypted data from my hard drive into a clear, damning narrative, the offshore accounts, the forged documents, the memos between my father and brother, the list of every pension fund, every family, every life they had ruined. The night of the gala, the air in our small cabin crackled with a nervous energy. On a bank of monitors, we had a live feed from every security camera in the opulent ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. We watched as the titans of industry, the political elites, and the cream of New York society streamed in, a river of jewels and tuxedos. We saw my mother, Eleanor, gliding through the crowd, a perfect hostess in a sea of sharks, her smile as brilliant and brittle as the diamonds around her neck. We saw Julian, looking gaunt and nervous, forcing a charismatic smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. And then we saw my father, Alistair, take his place at the head table, looking every bit the king in his castle, projecting an aura of unshakable confidence that we knew was a complete sham. Liam and I sat in silence, our faces illuminated by the blue glow of the screens. "It's time," I whispered. He gave me a single, determined nod. "Let's give them a show." Alistair strode to the podium to a round of thunderous applause. The grand ballroom fell silent. On the massive screens behind him, a slickly produced video began to play, showing images of my mother visiting hospitals and my father shaking hands with community leaders. "Tonight," Alistair began, his voice resonating with false sincerity, "we reaffirm our commitment to the values that built this great nation: integrity, hard work, and above all, trust." Liam's fingers danced across his keyboard. "Showtime," he murmured. On the screens behind my father, the images of his supposed charity work began to flicker, as if from a technical glitch. The crowd murmured. Alistair shot a furious look towards a tech booth, but it was too late. Liam had locked them out. The images of smiling children were replaced by something else entirely. A bank statement from a Cayman Islands account showing a balance of $87 million. The name on the account, Elysian Fields Holdings. The crowd gasped. The statement vanished, replaced by a scanned copy of an internal memo addressed to Julian from Alistair. The subject line read, "Pension Fund Disbursement Protocol." The body of the memo laid out, in cold, corporate language, the plan to divert public funds into their personal accounts. My father's signature was clearly visible at the bottom. Alistair froze, his face draining of all color. He tapped the microphone, a pathetic, squeaking sound echoing through the hall. "We seem to be experiencing some technical difficulties," he stammered, but his voice was drowned out by the rising wave of panicked whispers from the audience. The screen changed again. A list of names began to scroll, hundreds of them, then thousands. Underneath the list, a title appeared: Individual Investors in the Devereaux Premier Growth Fund. These were the people they had robbed, their life savings displayed for all to see. Several people in the audience stood up, pointing at the screen, their faces masks of horror and recognition. They were victims, sitting right there at my father's tables. The chaos was building, a crescendo of outrage and disbelief. Alistair turned, his back to the audience, staring at the screens in pure, unadulterated horror. He looked like a man watching his own execution. "One more thing," I said quietly to Liam. He nodded, and with a final keystroke, he cut all the feeds to the screens except for the central one. The scrolling list of names disappeared, replaced by a single, live video feed. It was my face. I was sitting in a simple, well-lit room, looking directly into the camera. I was no longer the mousy, invisible girl. My hair was cut short, my expression was calm, and my eyes held a fire that no one in that room had ever seen before. A collective, audible gasp swept through the ballroom. It was the sound of 1,000 people seeing a ghost. I saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. I saw Julian stumble backwards, as if he'd been physically struck. I saw my father turn back towards the podium, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief. He looked at the screen, at my face, and for a moment, his entire universe seemed to collapse. I let the silence hang for a beat, letting them absorb the impossible. Then, I spoke, my voice clear and steady, amplified by every speaker in the grand ballroom. "Hello, Father," I said. "Surprised to see me?" I didn't smile. I didn't need to. "You told me to leave it to the men with vision. But your vision was nothing more than high-level theft. You told me to forget what I saw. But some things, once seen, can never be forgotten." I paused, my gaze unwavering. "You didn't just fire me. You didn't just disown me. You tried to murder me. You sent my own brother to make sure I was dead. All to protect this empire of lies." I looked past the camera, as if I could see every person in that room. "Every dollar you've donated, every building with your name on it, is stained with the life savings of the people on that list. People who trusted you." I leaned forward slightly. "And just so there's no confusion, a complete, unredacted copy of all the evidence you've just seen, along with my full, sworn testimony, has just been delivered to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and the New York Times." I held my gaze for one final, damning second. "Your world is over." Then, I gave Liam a small nod. He cut the feed. The screen went black, and in the silent, suffocating darkness of the ballroom, a single woman's scream shattered the quiet, followed by an explosion of pure pandemonium. The immediate aftermath was a storm. From the sanctuary of our cabin, Liam and I watched it all unfold on the news. The footage was surreal. Flashing lights from police cars and news vans bathed the front of the Plaza Hotel in a chaotic red and blue glow. We saw federal agents, stern-faced and purposeful, escorting my father and Julian out in handcuffs. Alistair, the titan of industry, looked small and pathetic, his face ashen, a coat thrown over his head. Julian just looked broken, his eyes vacant. My mother, Eleanor, was taken to a hospital after collapsing, a victim of the very public image she had so meticulously curated. The Devereaux name, once a symbol of power and prestige, became an overnight synonym for disgrace. The empire didn't just fall, it imploded, a black hole of scandal that sucked in everyone and everything associated with it. In the cabin, there was no triumphant celebration. There was no shouting, no high-fives. Liam simply turned off the monitors, plunging the room into the quiet darkness of the forest. We sat there for a long time, the only sound being the gentle crackle of the fire. The weight of what we had done settled over us. It was a victory, but a heavy one, born from immense pain and loss. I had destroyed my family to get justice, and the finality of it was a profound and sorrowful thing. Liam reached over and placed his hand over mine. It was a simple gesture of solidarity, of shared understanding. We had walked through fire together, and we had come out the other side. "It's done," he said softly. "It's finally done." I squeezed his hand, a single tear tracing a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, or even of joy. It was a tear of release. The ghost had finally been laid to rest. The months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and media frenzies. The Devereaux trial was the story of the year. My testimony, delivered via secure video link, was the final nail in their coffin. My father, arrogant to the last, tried to blame everything on Julian. Julian, in a desperate bid for a lighter sentence, turned on our father, revealing even more crimes, more layers of deceit. Their bond, once the central pillar of the family, had rotted into a bitter, pathetic rivalry. They were both found guilty on dozens of counts of fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. They would spend the rest of their lives in prison. As a whistleblower, the SEC awarded me a significant percentage of the funds they recovered. It was a fortune, but it felt like blood money. I didn't want it. Liam and I talked long into the night about what to do. The money was a tool, a resource, and we had a responsibility to use it for something good. We decided to create our own foundation, not one for show like my mother's, but a real, working organization. We called it the Phoenix Foundation, dedicated to providing legal and financial support to victims of corporate and financial fraud. We hired a small team of passionate lawyers and forensic accountants, people who believed in the cause. Our first clients were a group of retired teachers from Ohio whose pension fund had been gutted by a company that used the exact same methods as Devereaux Capital. I met with them, a family of 3, their faces etched with worry and despair. A young couple and their elderly mother who had lost everything. I looked into their eyes and saw my own past fear reflected back at me. "We're going to help you," I told them, my voice firm with a newfound purpose. "We'll fight for you." In that moment, sitting in our modest office, I felt a sense of peace that no amount of money could ever buy. Liam and I hadn't just sought revenge. We had transformed our pain into a force for healing. We were breaking the cycle. About a year after the sentencing, I received a letter. It was from my mother. She had been spared prosecution, cast by the media and her own lawyers as another one of Alistair's victims, a clueless wife who was ignorant of her husband's business. We both knew that wasn't the entire truth. She had been willfully blind, a beneficiary who chose not to ask where the money came from. She was living in a small, respectable condo in Florida now, her assets frozen, her social circle vanished. She wrote that she was sorry, that she missed me, and that she wanted to see me. Against Liam's gentle advice, I agreed. I needed to close this final chapter. I met her at a sterile, impersonal coffee shop. She looked older, smaller, stripped of the Devereaux glamour that had been her armor for so long. She tried to apologize, but her words were hollow, laced with self-pity. "I never knew Genevieve," she said, twisting a paper napkin in her hands. "Your father, he kept that world so separate. If I had known what he was doing, what he asked of Julian..." She trailed off, looking at me with pleading eyes. She was still performing, still trying to cast herself in the most sympathetic light. She was sorry she had lost her status, her wealth, her comfort. She wasn't truly sorry for the crime itself. I didn't get angry. I felt a profound, weary sadness. I looked at this woman who had given birth to me, but had never truly been my mother. "You knew," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You didn't know the details, maybe. But you knew the life we were living was built on something unsustainable. You knew, and you chose not to look. Because you liked the view." Her face crumpled, the mask of victimhood falling away to reveal the bitter truth. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered. "My life is over." I stood up to leave. "No," I said, looking down at her. "Your life isn't over. It's just finally real. You have a chance to build a life based on something other than a name. I hope, for your sake, you take it." I didn't offer forgiveness or reconciliation. I offered her the simple, unvarnished truth. As I walked out of that coffee shop and into the bright Florida sunshine, I felt the last, gossamer thin thread connecting me to my past finally snap. I was free. My name is Genevieve Devereaux, but that name no longer defines me. It's a part of my past, a scar that reminds me of a battle I fought and won. Being left for dead on the side of that road was the most horrific thing that ever happened to me, but it was also the beginning of my real life. It forced me to see that I had been seeking validation from an empty well, trying to earn the love of people who were incapable of giving it. They underestimated me. They saw me as a quiet, compliant cog in their machine. They never realized that the quietest people are the ones who are listening the most, the ones who see everything. My greatest weakness, in their eyes, became my greatest strength. Liam and I continue our work with the Phoenix Foundation. We've helped dozens of families reclaim their lives and their futures. We are a team, partners in a way that transcends simple labels. He is the family I chose, the one forged in loyalty and mutual respect, not in the cold calculus of blood and legacy. Our bond is a testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound connections are born from the ashes of our deepest betrayals. Looking back, I realize that justice is not just about punishing the wicked. It's about rebuilding, about creating something new and good from the wreckage of the old. It's about finding your own worth, not in the reflection of someone else's approval, but in the quiet, steady strength of your own heart. I wanted to share this story with you all, not for sympathy, but as a reminder that your value is inherent. It does not diminish based on someone's inability to see it. Sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest advantage you can have. It allows you to move in the shadows, to gather your strength, to plan your next move while everyone else is looking the other way. If you are in a situation where you feel invisible or cast aside, I want you to hear this. Your story is not over. The final chapter has not yet been written. You are the author of your own life, and you hold the power to write a spectacular ending. Thank you for listening to my journey. Your presence here, your willingness to hear my story, means more to me than you'll ever know. Before I go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you had to completely redefine who you were? Share your story in the comments below. Reading them reminds all of us that we are part of a larger community of people who have overcome incredible odds. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and vindication. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, who might be feeling lost or underestimated, please share this video with them. Thank you again for joining me. I wish you all strength, peace, and the courage to write your own magnificent story.